In the mid-1940s, the Second World War was nearing its end. And the Second World War doesn't exactly have a shortage of horrible stories. One of these stories took place on an island off the coast of Burma, also known as Myanmar, where hundreds of Japanese soldiers would allegedly perish in what has become known as the Ramree Island Crocodile Massacre. The largest island in the entire Rakhine coast, Ramree Island is separated from the mainland by a narrow canal-like strait. Despite being originally used as a trading post for the Kingdom of Maracu, the island is known for the events that took place during the Second World War. During the early stages of what is known as the Burma campaign, the island would be captured along with the rest of southern Burma. Burma was part of the British Empire during the Second World War, and it would be captured by the Japanese, which meant that the Burma campaign was fought primarily between the British and Japanese Empire for control of this colony. Britain was on one side alongside China and support from the US. The other side was the invading armies of Japan, which were supported by Thailand and the Indian National Army. The campaign began in 1942 after 4 years of planning, when Japan invaded Burma. After the capture of Rangoon, which is the capital of Burma, in March 1942, the Japanese forces began to drive the British out of the country. Several failed offensives to retake these lost territories would be launched in 1942 and 1943 by the International Allied Force in British India. But Japan would successfully hold the island until 1945. In January 1945, the Allied forces launched Operation Matador to retake Ramree Island and the neighboring islands. The British and Indian forces attacked the island with 6,000 soldiers, and the following battle would last for about 6 weeks. The battle would eventually reach a standstill, and this standstill would last until the British Royal Marines alongside the 36th Indian Infantry Brigade outflanked a Japanese position. By doing this, Allied forces were able to split the remaining party in two, which left a group of around 1,000 Japanese soldiers isolated and trapped. The British soldiers would urge these isolated Japanese troops to surrender to avoid further bloodshed. The Japanese soldiers were exhausted and some were wounded from the battle, but they remained defiant. So, instead of surrendering, they decided to abandon the base and try to reach the larger force of Japanese soldiers across the island. And this decision would take them into the swamps. To reach the larger force, the Japanese soldiers would have to make a 9-mile journey through a mangrove swamp, with, of course, the British pursuing them. The mangrove swamps of Ramree Island were treacherous, and the British soldiers decided not to follow the Japanese soldiers into the swamp. Instead, the British decided to set up a perimeter around the thick wilderness to monitor and wait for any of the Japanese soldiers to emerge from the swamp. Of the soldiers, only an estimated 450 to 500 men managed to escape the swamp, and 20 of these men would be captured by the British forces waiting just outside the swamp. The mangrove swamp of the island was thick with mud, and going through it was a struggle. So while struggling through the deep mud, the soldiers began to succumb to tropical diseases, dehydration, and starvation. They also had to deal with mosquitoes, spiders, snakes, and scorpions that were hiding in the thick forest. But the biggest danger was the one that was lurking in the muddy water: saltwater crocodiles. The saltwater crocodile is the largest of all living reptiles. An amphibious creature, the saltwater crocodile can be found in habitats near the coast such as rivers, swamps, billabongs, beaches, and sometimes even the open sea. They are highly territorial and can be very aggressive towards any creature entering their territory. They are also opportunistic predators, meaning that they will prey on any animal. So as these Japanese soldiers ventured deeper and deeper into the swamp, they would soon come face to face with these ancient creatures, and they never stood a chance. The survivors that were captured by the British would reportedly tell horrific stories of the crocodiles attacking their fellow soldiers as they moved deeper into the swamp. These crocodiles would appear seemingly out of nowhere to drag some of the soldiers off. And it only got worse as it got dark, with the sounds of men screaming, gunfire, and animal attacks echoing through the area. A veteran of the Burma campaign named Bruce Wright would give this written account in his 1962 collection Wildlife Sketches Near and Far. That night was the most horrible that any member of the motor launch crews ever experienced. The scattered rifle shots in the pitch-black swamp, punctured by the screams of wounded men crushed in the jaws of huge reptiles, and the blurred, worrying sound of spinning crocodiles made a cacophony of hell that has rarely been duplicated on Earth. At dawn, the vultures arrived to clean up what the crocodiles had left. He also reiterated that only 20 of the men were found alive. Bruce Wright is not only a veteran of the Burma campaign, he's also credited for the idea of so-called frogmen units, meaning soldiers that were trained to use scuba diving equipment to get close to and observe the enemy. This idea of Wright's was put into action, and Wright was appointed lieutenant commander with orders to form the Sea Reconnaissance Unit. While performing his duties, Wright also spent hours documenting the local sea life and would become a respected wildlife biologist and author after the war. He is also credited as being the main source for the Ramree Island massacre. Another account about the attack comes from Lieutenant General Jack Jacob, who recounted his experiences during the battle in his memoir, An Odyssey in War and Peace, where he wrote, "Over 1,000 soldiers of the Japanese garrison retreated into the crocodile-infested mangrove swamps. We went in with boats and interpreters using loud hailers asking them to come out. Not a single one did. Saltwater crocodiles, some of them well over 20 feet long, frequented these waters. It's not difficult to imagine what happened to the Japanese who took refuge in the mangroves." And another veteran of the 26th Division, named Robert Duff, would record an oral history for the BBC in 2006. He stated that they were able to push the Japanese soldiers to the swamp on the other side of the island. The soldiers knew that the swamp was filled with crocodiles, but they decided to take their chances in the swamp rather than surrendering. And according to Duff, only a handful of these soldiers came out alive. The story of the Ramree Massacre was reported in several papers, but the tale is still largely unverified. But despite that, the massacre would be named in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most number of fatalities in a crocodile attack. There is some skepticism regarding this incident, but the skepticism isn't that crocodiles took the lives of some of these men, rather the numbers. It's practically impossible to know for sure how many of those men were taken by the crocodiles and how many of them succumbed to disease, dehydration, or starvation, not to mention the fact that there were scorpions, mosquitoes, and venomous snakes. Bruce Wright's quote about the incident is the most well-known in association to this event, but it's important to remember that he never claimed that he personally witnessed this massacre. In his memoir, The Frogmen of Burma from 1968, Wright described how he arrived on Ramree after the main battle had been concluded. He then spoke with other members of his Sea Reconnaissance Unit. 2 of these men would abandon their paddleboards during the Battle of Ramree and climb up a mangrove tree to avoid a crocodile. It was when they were up in this tree that they heard the shouting and gunfire coming from the swamp. Another writer, herpetologist Stephen Platt, also pointed out that while other chapters in Wright's book were told in first person, the account of the Battle of Ramree Island was told in the third person, which to him indicated that Wright was repeating a story that he had been told by someone else, and not something that he experienced himself. And Platt also points out that Wright never claimed that the crocodiles were solely responsible for the deaths of these soldiers. The reason this is important to remember is that Wright's reputation as a respected wildlife biologist and author, not to mention his work with the frogmen, led to his quote about the Battle of Ramree being accepted as fact, even though he never claimed that it was. So the numbers is very much in question, which made people look at the crocodiles. Is it possible that crocodiles could be responsible for that many deaths? Saltwater crocodiles are regarded as being very dangerous to humans. Up to 1,000 human deaths per year are attributed to these reptiles. One example of this is in Uganda, where one crocodile, which would be given the name Osama, would terrorize a village for 14 years. Between 1991 and 2005, this 16 feet or almost 5 meters long crocodile allegedly attacked and ate about 83 people. According to some reports, this crocodile would emerge from Lake Victoria to snatch children that got too close to the water. It was also said to intentionally swim beneath fishing boats to capsize them. This crocodile, Osama, which was estimated to be around 75 years old, was captured in 2005 and then sent to captivity. And that's just one example of a very dangerous crocodile. So, like I said, no one doubts that crocodiles did attack the soldiers. It's the numbers that people have a problem with. Crocodiles form groups called basks. Basks can have as many as 20 or more crocodiles in them. And these groups are formed so that the reptiles can take turns hunting and resting, and also to keep the younger generation of crocodiles safe. So if we imagine that the swamps of Ramree had several of these basks spread out over several miles, there might have been hundreds of crocodiles in that swamp if the crocodiles are truly responsible for the deaths of 400 to 500 soldiers, which a lot of people don't think is feasible. The average crocodile eats up to 2 kilos of meat per day. If there were hundreds of crocodiles in the swamp, what did they eat? Was there really enough food in that swamp to sustain that many crocodiles? Many zoologists and historians doubt this. One such is historian Frank McLean, who in his 2011 analysis of the Burma campaign wrote, "If thousands of crocodiles were involved in the massacre, as in the urban myth, how have these ravening monsters survived before, and how were they to survive later? The ecosystem of a mangrove swamp with an exiguous mammal life simply would not have permitted the existence of so many saurians before the coming of the Japanese. Animals are not exempt from the laws of overpopulation and starvation." While the numbers are unclear, some reports say that circa 500 soldiers fled, 20 were captured, and 500 soldiers died. But it's very unclear and unlikely that all of those deaths were purely due to the crocodiles. As I've mentioned in this video, there were many dangers in that swamp that could have taken the lives of these soldiers. Diseases, scorpions, mosquitoes, exhaustion, snake bites, drowning, and previous injuries. Not to mention that some of the soldiers might even have gotten delirious and drawn their weapon on their fellow soldier, thinking that it was the enemy. And it's also possible that some of the soldiers made it out of the swamp and escaped into the mainland without the British soldiers realizing. There is no doubt whatsoever that crocodiles were responsible for some of the deaths. In fact, there were even reports that crocodiles were seen eating human bodies the very next day. So the crocodiles absolutely attacked these Japanese soldiers, but they were not solely responsible. The interesting thing is though that even if the numbers are not as high as the legend says, the Battle of Ramree Island might still be the deadliest crocodile attack in recorded history.